In this conversation, Professor Henri Bezuidenhout of the School of Economics, Northwest University, tells us about the importance of being able to work between cultures. Being aware of what cultural differences are gives us a deeper understanding of ourselves and others, and helps us to respond in line with how others see the world. This has great value for how we practice presence in nursing. Please join us in reflecting on this important topic.
Hello, I'm Henri Bezuidenhout. I'm formerly a professor of international trade, the School of Economics of Northwest University. It's actually in my endeavors in international trade that I became passionate about understanding cultures and working across cultures. So because I realized that, most business is business, but especially if you deal in the African continent, the reason why businesses are successful or failing is due to cultural understandings. So the last 7 years I've really developed and grown and invested in understanding cultures and working across cultures.
That's very interesting, and I think for us in nursing, that's a very important concept to keep in mind. And I read in your bio that you are a cultural intelligence and cross-cultural specialist. Please tell us, what does that mean?
Okay, so cultural intelligence is used as a separate concept because it's patented. So it's very specifically the concept of cultural intelligence that belongs to the Cultural Intelligence Center. And it is basically defined as it's the ability to work between cultures. So it's not, the big thing is to know that you'll never know everything about a culture. So even cross-cultural competency then, which is sort of the group name, is how do I work between cultures and work with people from different cultures. So I don't do work with, for example, Germans and Chinese. We always use them because they're on the extreme scales of culture. I don't need to understand the full German culture or the full Chinese culture to be able to work with them and see how they operate. And that's really what cross-cultural competence as a group name and cultural intelligence implies.
Is there do you think there are people who are more naturally inclined or has a natural ability to have cultural intelligence or to work cross-culturally, or do we all have to learn it?
I think we all have to learn it, depending on your exposure. Obviously, it becomes easier or you are more used to it. So for instance, in the international scale, people who travel a lot and really meet with people, not just go to the Hyatt and act like a South African, or go to Thailand or see only South Africans while you're there. If you are really traveling and meeting people from different cultures and so on, you become more aware of it. I think in terms of the South Africa, due to our history, a lot of people were forced together to live together in townships. So there's especially in the African population, there's a much higher sensitivity and understanding of cultural differences, for instance, than there would be in what you would consider the traditional white population. Because especially in your Western mindset, if I can put it like that, or European, if you sort of culture want to talk about it, the mindset is sort of me, myself, and I, and the bubble in which I exist. And we all, psychologically speaking, we all have this belief that other people would do and think like us. And really, if you want to go to cross-cultural competency, then the realization comes from, no. Other people do think and act differently than us. They look at the world differently than us.
And I think in nursing, this is a very relevant concept that we as nurses have to provide nursing care to people from a lot of different cultures. I think we have some experience of knowing how to, and we also have that as part of our curriculum to work cross-culturally or to take someone's culture in mind. But I wonder, what is your view on the relationship between culture and presence. If we say presence is really to see the human in front of us and build a relationship and deliver care through relationship, how do you think culture influences presence?
Yeah, so on the one side, you will have your way of which you think is the correct way to work. So you will think if I treat my patient in a certain way, that would be respectful and dignified, and that, but that doesn't mean that the other person will experience it as such, because their concepts of these things are different. So the presence will be to understand as a human, who is my patient, what is their preferences, especially if you think that in extreme, ER situations, they are not able to communicate it. But they will definitely know what you're doing. So, okay, obviously if somebody's unconscious, then that's different. But once they are conscious, then even if they cannot respond, they will experience you to be either kind and gentle and helpful, or austere and tyrannical, if you want to put it like that. I'm just thinking about what is the normal ER experience. And, as a caring and a person who want to treat someone in a dignified way, how will you treat a patient if you understand what their background is?
Okay, so it seems to me then presence in itself opens up the opportunity to get to know the cultural preferences of the person, of the patient, and then provide care accordingly. So I think presence is perhaps in a way of being culturally intelligent, or to approach care according to the needs and preferences of the patient.
Yes, it's got a lot of self-knowledge and a lot of self-work. I think that's 80% of the work. Actually, understanding the other people is 20% of the work. But in the South African context, I'm just thinking that, especially if you look at the African cultures, to really understand that how vastly different they are amongst themselves. There are, general commonalities, but between your group in Zulu, Xhosa, Botswana, Bapedi,
You mentioned something very important, self-knowledge and being sensitive. So can you please give us some tips on self-knowledge and say why you think that is the 80% of how we should go about it?
yes, so how deep do you want to go? So we can talk about the cultural side, other stuff, me and my coaching background, and so on. You can really go into self-awareness and what self-awareness mean. I don't know how deep you want to go. But just from a pure cultural point of view is the awareness that I do things in the following way, and I think the following stuff would be the correct way of doing. But if that awareness is then that, okay, so I'm used to doing this, would this be the correct way of actually handling? So is that millisecond that you just need to think of, is what I assume to be the normal way, the right way to handle a patient. So in culture, there's a saying that fish do not see water. And that's why self-work is so important, because our own culture is actually the one that we don't understand, because it's so part of your way of thinking. If you actually want to understand your culture, it's actually good to go and get to know people from other cultures and ask them, well, what do you observe? Sometimes you'll be surprised.
Oh, that sounds very interesting. Have you done some work like that? And if so, what were your findings?
As a South African, I always ask people, well, what is your experience? Because especially if you deal with like people from the United States and so on, they just assume you're an American.
Okay.
And you say, no, I'm not. There's nothing American about me. But what is your experience? So you obviously don't upfront everybody, I need a full cultural analysis from you, tell me, but it's sort of in your experience, please tell me. And especially amongst certain crowds in South Africa, it's difficult to do the work because people like to run to racism as the answer for everything. And coming from the cross-cultural space, I would just say people just stop. Just because we actually don't understand cultures don't mean that we hate people. And that actually, if somebody says that, it is a big reflection of a lack of self-awareness. Because if you actually have the awareness, and sort of in the cross-cultural world, we also say, you know, we're there to celebrate differences. I acknowledge you, and I want you to live who you are and express who you are, and that comes through me understanding it. So it's more celebrating the differences and accepting them and working with them. And if that becomes your attitude, then you will not want to create artificial divisions based on artificial concepts like skin color.
It seems to me that self-awareness and cultural awareness brings along freedom to be yourself and to accept the other person as they are. And that in itself can enable presence.
You know, if you're in the presence, you say that's all that anybody wants to be, is accepted for who they are. So if you remove any ideas or barriers that we artificially create, because obviously society is geared to do that, put you in a little box and you are different from that box and you should act in a certain way. Well, saying, well, I'm just going to accept you for who you are, and I want to learn, tell me more. If, for instance, my expectation is obviously you're from a certain culture, so this is my expectation, but are you like this? And the example there that we always use, if you think of China, which is a country of 1.3 billion people, and you compare it with a country like Finland, which is 4 million people. So statistically speaking, there will be more Chinese who are Finnish in their way of doing things than there are people in Finland.
Yeah.
Because it's all a statistical normal curve. Mm-hmm. We expect the general population to be around a certain average. But in 1.3 billion people, you know, at least 200 million people will be on the extremes. That's 200 million, that's more people than in South Africa.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. I can't even get my head that to think. But that's really true, is to ask the person in front of you, what do you prefer, and not rely too much on averages and prejudices and what I think and what I assume.
Yeah, so the big conundrum is there's a thing called stereotyping. So everybody always says stereotyping is bad. In culture, we're saying as long as the stereotype is not negative, it's your begin point. I expect someone from Spain will want a siesta in the afternoon. See, I don't attach a value on it. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's my expectation. But do all Spaniards take a siesta in the afternoon? Obviously not. So that brings it back to you and your presences. I know what my preferences are. Now, what is yours?